Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to another episode of the Iron Life Podcast. I am your host, Chris Tutela, here to help you live an iron life. And this is the first episode, I believe, that we're recording here in 2023. So happy New Year to everyone. Actually, I can't remember the last episode. Did I record it before? I think so. I think we put that out before the new year. So happy New Year to everybody listening. Hopefully those of you who listened to last episode, hopefully you guys put some of those tactics into play and you're seeing some progress and really gaining some traction on your goals that you set for 2023. So today I want to talk to you about training like an athlete and the significance of training like an athlete, why it's important to you even if you're not an athlete, right? So whether you are, if you're a weekend warrior, you still play soccer team, you still play on a soccer team, or you play pickup sports with your friends, or whatever it is that you do martial arts. This will apply to you. This will apply to higher level athletes who are still competitive, and also for just the average guy or gal that wants to be in the best shape possible. Because training like an athlete, what does that really mean, right? What does an athlete need? Like, why does this become such, the term functional training has gotten thrown around for years. And then, there was a while there where functional training meant you had to balance on a Bosu ball or a wobble board and, just do like super lightweight and squats on shit like that. And that the term just got thrown around so much that it really, I think even to this day, it just became distorted on, functional training. So let's talk about that. Like, what does it actually mean to train like an athlete? What are some of the needs that athletes have for their sports to perform at a high level? And how does this carry over to you? So let's take a bird's eye view of what it is every athlete is going to need in order to perform better. So number one, an athlete is going to need stability. They're going to need mobility. They're going to need power, strength. Sometimes their sport will require hypertrophy, depending on what the sport is, and then conditioning. And depending on the sport, the energy systems will vary that we need to target primarily for the sport. Although all are important, different sports require different energy systems predominantly. So we're going to talk about all this and then, again, how it applies to you. So here's the thing, guys. First and foremost, I think that a lot of coaches, this is, if I'm talking to my younger self here, you would think of training athletes and think that every athlete that comes into your gym is going to need this really high-level, fancy program where we're going to need to use bands, we're going to need to use chains, we're going to have to do a lot of different power training and this and that, and sure, all of those things have their purpose and they have their place. But I'll tell you what, if you think that every athlete that walks into your door is going to need that, like unless you're working with the elite of the elite, people who already are freak athletes, already freakishly strong, freakishly explosive, they take care of their nutrition, they take care of themselves in recovery. Like, unless you're working with them, most of the athletes that are going to come through your door are weak, they have poor mobility, they lack stability. We just need to get them stronger first. And especially if you're training younger athletes, high school, even college, believe it or not, even some pro athletes are going to come to you and they're going to be lacking strength and power and all these things. And you're going to be like, holy shit, I thought that since they were a professional athlete, they needed all this stuff. And that's not always the case. So the point is, regardless of where they're at and what they need, if you are a coach for athletes or the general population, rule number one, do no harm. Don't get anybody hurt, right? So don't think that you have to program this fancy, wacky shit that somebody shouldn't be doing just because it's going to look cool on an Instagram video. Do no harm. That's the first rule, right? So with that said, these things that we just talked about are important for athletes and everybody else. So let's go down the list here of these different boxes that we need to check in your training program that will carry over to your performance. Because listen, it's your performance in life. It's not just if you are still actively playing sports, right? Everyone should want to move and perform and feel like an athlete, still be able to do athletic things as you age in life, all right? So the first thing that I talked about was stability, and we'll put these two together, stability and mobility, right? The reason that they're important, first off, stability and mobility, injury prevention, right? That's one of the biggest things. If you are working with someone who's an athlete, or if you are a weekend warrior, one of the things you want to make sure of is that you don't get hurt playing your sport or doing your job or playing with your kids, right? You want to make sure that we're preventing injury. So creating more stability, right? Being able to stabilize your spine while extremities move, being able to maintain a neutral spinal alignment if you're going to bend down and pick up your kids, right? Being able to keep your joints stable is going to help you prevent injury, right? Now, on the mobility side of things, mobility is specifically talking about the range of motion of your joints. So if you have good stability, if we're targeting that through your training and using the proper exercises and drills to target stability and mobility, then you're going to be able to move better. You're going to feel better. If you are dealing with joint pain, enhancing mobility of the joint could help depending on what you have going on. But these are things that not only help us prevent injury, but also get us feeling better, right? So how do we achieve better stability and mobility in your training? Well, first off, let's kind of like run through a quick checklist here because there's a lot of things we could be doing, right? So one is having a good prehab program where you're putting in maybe you throw in a couple of minutes of soft tissue work. Maybe you throw in a few corrective exercises and drills. Maybe we're throwing in some really good stuff in your dynamic warm-up for the upper back, for your knees, for your hips, making sure you're activating the muscles that are being trained, the joints that are going to be trained that day, preparing the body daily. So using these drills from your prehab and from your warm-up that we're talking about, but using them as like daily hygiene, right? Going through that first thing in the morning or when you're watching TV at night. You could take a handful of the exercises that feel the best for you and you feel truly help you and just do them throughout the day. Sprinkle them in. You know, if you're at work, you know, maybe you stand up, you do a few ankle mobility drills. You know, if you have a standing desk, you get up and you do a couch stretch or something like that, like in the middle of your workday. Maybe you have a foam roller in your office or at home, wherever you're working from these days. You have a lacrosse ball, and you address these things throughout your day. Maybe it's part of a morning routine or an evening routine. It doesn't matter, but you want to look at it. You want to look at having drills like this incorporated just like you get up and you brush your teeth. It should just be a part of your day. It doesn't have to be super time consuming. It could just be a minute or two. It could be 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever you can dedicate. But if you do it daily and you make it consistent, then we're going to be checking that mobility box every single day. And you're going to make a hell of a lot of progress as that accumulates over 6 months, a year, and so on. So with that being said, you're also going to use this as part of your warm-up, right? So you're doing it on the days that you train. Maybe that's a little bit more in depth. It's a little bit more thorough. You take a little bit more time when you're doing it on days that you train. But on days off, you work this stuff in for a couple minutes every day. And now we're making some progress, and this will add up. But I want to tell you, too, like when it comes to mobility, because there's so many mobility drills, there's so many things out there that you can do, and they are effective. And you've probably heard me say this before if you're a listener, if you're an active listener of the show. But the best way to enhance stability and mobility is through a quality training program and taking quality exercises through a full active range of motion. So, like, for example, one of the best ways to create mobility of the hips and also lengthen and stretch the hamstrings is a Romanian deadlift. So if you are checking the box of hamstring flexibility and some hip mobility while you're getting stronger, that is going to give you a huge bang for your buck, because not only are we getting stronger and building muscle, but you're also checking this mobility and flexibility box as well. So look at a squat. If you get really strong in a squat pattern and now you could squat to a full depth with a neutral spine, that is going to really be the thing that improves your mobility and stability overall, because you're strength training, you're loading the body and going through these ranges of motion. That isn't to say that mobility drills and stretches and soft tissue work, it's not to say that those things are useless. They're very useful, as I just mentioned. But getting stronger through these full ranges of motion, using quality strength training exercises, that's going to be the best thing that really helps you enhance your mobility for the long haul. So it's really important for you to really always take a look at your technique. Always take a look at what exercises you're using. You know, you've heard me talk about the fundamental human movement patterns before on this podcast. The squat, the hinge, the lunge, pressing, pulling, loaded carries, although that might not be the best thing for mobility, but those other exercises are, right? And then when you throw in body weight exercises, because if I say horizontal pushing, you might think, like a dumbbell bench press, which is correct, but also an exercise that would be the same exact movement pattern, but better for mobility of the scapula or the shoulder blades would be a push-up, right? So having body weight exercises as a staple in your strength training routine, again, it's going to check several boxes. Now we got shoulder stability. We're talking about hypertrophy, relative strength. We're talking about scapular mobility. So again, what exercises are you using in your program? Because those are the things that are really going to move the needle big picture and get you feeling and performing at your best. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense there. Stability and mobility, those are two things that athletes need. Those are two things that you need. So let's move on to the next thing, which is power, right? Explosive power. Now, what is power? It's strength times speed, right? Being able to display strength fast, quickly, explosively, right? Now, this is important because as you age, power is going to be one of the first things that you lose as you get older, right? So to stay young, you should still continue to train explosively, target those fast twitch fibers, ignite your central nervous system, if nothing else, prior to training. So throwing in some explosive movements like a jump, a sprint, or a med ball throw after to finish your warm-up. Excite the central nervous system, put you into a more ready and safer state to train. Now, we could take that further and we could add that in the middle of your workout, later in the workout. Like if you are an athlete, it is important to be able to still display power when you are fatigued in the fourth quarter or in the third period of a wrestling match, whatever, right? You still need to be explosive. But let's look at a few things here. So as a whole, I think that adding power drills into your warm-up, like I just mentioned, the throws and sprints and jumps, anyone could benefit from that because they're athletic movements. Some jumps are not good for everyone. If you have busted up knees, you might be better off just doing throws, some type of med ball slam or something like that. That's something that's not too stressful or too much impact on the knees. But when we're talking about true power training, developing and enhancing power, that there's a broad spectrum there. Because what I just mentioned, anyone could do. You could excite the nervous system, do some throws, jumps, sprints, whatever. But to take that further, in order to truly become more powerful, the first thing you need to do is develop strength. Because what is power? It's strength times speed. If you're weak, then, doing some type of, speed barbell work or Olympic lifting or something like that, it's not going to benefit you because you're too weak to display any strength. And to do that quickly is just going to become a giant, injury waiting to happen. And also, you're not going to really get much out of that type of power training, right? So, to do speed squats or something like that, banded stuff, you're not going to really get much out of that until you reach a certain level of strength. But if you are somebody who is already strong, if you're already more advanced, then having some specific power work in your program, and maybe you have speed days programmed, like if you're following like a conjugate model or something like that, where you're doing max effort lifts earlier in the week and you're doing speed work later in the week, that's a different story. But you have to be a little bit more advanced to do that properly. But again, anyone could throw a med ball and do some med ball slams. I don't think that's going to hurt anyone or waste anybody's time. If for nothing else, just excite that nervous system and put you into a more ready and safer state to train so you can develop that strength a little bit more effectively and get more out of your strength training workouts. But with that said, unless you're somebody that's more advanced and doing the stuff we just talked about, one of the best ways to address power in your training is going to be through jumps and throws and sprints. Maybe they're hill sprints, maybe they're band resisted sprints, maybe they're sled sprints, so you're doing you're sprinting with a resistance. There's different things that you can do. But those are the safest ways to address power in your training. And there's not much of a learning curve there, right? Like I think if I teach you how to slam a med ball, you could pick it up after, a few attempts. So those things have a really low learning curve, and they give you a nice bang for your buck. So, but either way, wherever you're at, incorporating power training into your program is essential. Now, let's move down the line here, okay? So what else is important for an athlete? So we talked about stability and mobility, power. Now, strength is going to be important for any athlete. It's also going to be important for you. Now, if you are an athlete, it depends on your sport, on how far we're looking to take your strength, right? You don't need to squat 600 pounds if you are a cross-country runner. However, enhancing your squat and getting stronger is only going to help. But my point is, there is a point of diminishing return on how much we address that in your training. But regardless, strength is important, all right? It's important for injury prevention. It's important for bone density as you get older, especially you ladies out there listening to the show. Feeling good, feeling confident. Of course, strength is going to enhance your confidence if you know that you're stronger. But listen, it's also, if you're an athlete, getting stronger will also simultaneously enhance your conditioning just by getting stronger alone. Because you could now do more work with less effort. There's less energy required because of the effort that is going to be required if you're stronger. So, for example, if you have somebody that is super strong and they're trying to lift this heavy-ass dresser, right? They're helping their buddy move to lift that dresser up. It's going to be pretty easy for them. But if somebody's really weak and they're trying to lift that dresser and they're struggling, they just get it up, they're going to be a little winded by the time they get it up, right? So think of it like that. So that's going to help you on the conditioning front. But I want to talk to you not only about like those things, the injury prevention, the confidence, but I want to talk to you about how there are different types of strength and how both are important, and some are more important to specific sports than others. So one is absolute strength. So absolute strength, how much can you lift, period, right? If you look at a powerlifting meet, that is absolute strength. The bench, the squat, the deadlift, that's absolute strength. Doesn't matter their body weight. Well, it does. It's a weight class sport. But if you're a heavyweight power lifter, if you hold a world record and it's just max load lifted, that's all that matters, right? So that's absolute strength. What is your 1 rep max on a bench, a squat, a deadlift, a row, whatever? Okay. Now you have relative strength, which is relative to your body weight. So if you are somebody that can squat 500 pounds, but you can't do 1 chin-up because you got too much body fat on you, then your absolute strength is great, but your relative strength is poor, right? Now, on the flip side, if you're somebody who's leaner, let's look at a gymnast, for instance, they have incredible relative strength, right? Relative to their body weight, their strength is remarkable. They could do things on those rings that you're like, holy shit, super impressive feats of strength, right? That's not to say that they're weak in other strength training areas or exercises, rather. They could still probably, depending on the person, deadlift a decent amount of weight. They're probably not breaking world records in the deadlift, but they're probably strong, right? So either way, these things are important depending on, well, first off, if you're an athlete, it depends on what position you play, what sport you play. If you're an offensive lineman, it might not really matter how many chin-ups you can do, right? But if you could squat a fucking house, that's probably going to be more beneficial. What is your absolute strength? But if, to use the example of a gymnast, the gymnast relative strength is going to be much more valuable. Now, for the average person, the weekend warrior listening to this show, both are important, right? Unless you're a competitive power lifter that's trying to break records and compete in meets and all that stuff, then I'm not too concerned about your absolute strength, but it is still important to be strong. But your body weight, staying in a healthy body weight, so let me rephrase this. If your body weight is in a healthy range, meaning you're keeping your body fat low and you're strong, your relative strength is going to be good, right? You're going to have a good base level of relative strength, meaning you could do a good amount of push-ups. You could do a good amount of chin-ups. You could hold yourself in a plank position for a decent amount of time, right? Those things are going to matter more for your health, for your longevity, if for nothing else, because it means that you're maintaining a healthy body weight and you're keeping your body fat low. So the combination of these two things, absolute strength and relative strength, are super important for you. And then again, if you're an athlete, it just depends on your sport, it depends on your position and what your overall goal is. But it's important for you to just know the difference and to know that when I'm talking about strength, I'm not only referring to how much you could bench and how much you could deadlift. Like, how many quality chin-ups can you do if you're healthy enough to do chin-ups? How many quality push-ups could you do, right? All of those things matter. How long can you hold a plank, a legitimate plank, right? Not some of that shaky, wacky shit that you'll see out there, right? But how long could you do that? There's other fitness tests that are important outside of just, how much you could bench, squat, deadlift, etc., right? So the next thing is going to apply to some athletes, not every athlete. But if you're a listener of the show, this will certainly more than likely apply to you, and that's hypertrophy, right? So we all want to build lean muscle mass. What is lean muscle mass? It basically, like, you'll see it out there, right? Lean muscle is like a term that gets thrown around, doesn't really exist, right? Muscle is muscle. If you have body fat on you, then you're going to put more, might look more massive if you're building muscle with all that extra body fat on you, but when you put on muscle, you put on muscle, period, right? So when I say lean muscle, I'm saying that because odds are you want to look more like a lean wide receiver or defensive back, or, a 155 or 170 pound UFC fighter, lean, shredded, pretty jacked looking, athletic. So that's what I'm talking about. But building muscle mass, it has the same benefits of strength training in that of course, injury prevention. You're stronger, you're putting more muscle on, bone density, things like that. It kind of goes hand in hand with strength training, because if you're doing that correctly, depending on the rep ranges, you might put on some more muscle mass as well if you start strength training, depending on your level, all that stuff. So hypertrophy sometimes occurs just as a byproduct if strength training is a new stimulus for you. If you're more advanced, you'd have to really target it with your diet and specific rep ranges and sets and all that good stuff, and tempos, things like that. But why is hypertrophy or focusing on building muscle important? Well, it's especially important for fat loss, because the amount of muscle mass you have on your frame will ultimately help dictate your metabolic rate. So the more muscle you have, the faster your metabolism will work, because muscle is metabolically active. It requires more energy to sustain itself. So there's more metabolic activity going on. Your body is using these substrates to break down and maintain the muscle mass that is on your frame, right? So it's going to be using the calories you consume to do that. So it's more metabolically active. You'll be burning more calories throughout the day. That is one of the keys of sustainable fat loss. I've said it a million times on the show. That's 1,000,001, because it's that important for you to understand. The key to sustainable fat loss, among other things, of course, like sleep and, of course, your diet and your daily activity and things like that. But in the gym, one of the keys is to make sure you're focused on building muscle and getting stronger, because that is what changes your body composition. That is what adds muscle to your frame, helps you burn more calories every single day. And so when you take the body fat off, you're going to look not skinny fat or emaciated. You're going to look lean. You're going to look strong. You're going to look athletic and powerful. So for some sports, building muscle could help us, prevent injuries. It could help you for sure with your confidence, if nothing else, for that mental aspect. If somebody sees you and you're looking jacked out of your mind in your wrestling singlet or in your uniform, you're walking up to the coin toss in a football game and you got these jacked fucking biceps shooting out of your jersey. There is a mental component there. I don't care what anybody says, where if somebody's looking at you, they're sizing you up, right? They're eyeing up their opponent, just like you're doing. So if you're more jacked, there's going to be some type of psychological component there for you and for your opponent. But it has all these other benefits that I just mentioned as well. And so if your goal is to look like an athlete, then for sure, I don't think you want to look like a long distance runner. I don't know what your goal is, but if you're listening to the show, you probably want to look a little bit more jacked than that. So making sure that hypertrophy is one of your key targets and focuses in your training program. That is the name of the game for you. Okay, and finally, what else does an athlete need? Now, here's where it could get super specific. So I want you to listen to this and understand that, generally speaking, this last box is critical for you for health and longevity. If you're an athlete, it's going to be critical to make sure you're targeting the appropriate energy system for your specific sport. So this box is conditioning, right? So we could spend, and I actually did a podcast on this, I don't know, a couple of years ago now, but we could spend a lot of time just talking about energy systems, and that goes in depth. So we're just going to scratch the surface on energy systems right now. And just for you to understand your three energy systems, okay, let me put it this way. Number one, you have an aerobic energy system, which essentially means that your body will produce ATP with oxygen, okay, using oxygen. Then you have anaerobic energy systems, and there are two of them, all right? You have your ATP-PC system, and you have a glycolytic system. Both of those are anaerobic, meaning that oxygen is not utilized as a primary source of fuel to produce ATP, okay? We don't need to get too lost into the woods with this. ATP is your body's currency for energy, by the way, right? Adenosine triphosphate, that is your body's currency for energy, and your body produces it using those systems. Now, one of the key things is when it comes to sport, how fast ATP is required to be produced. So, and that is the system that will be utilized to produce ATP. So, for example, if I'm going to do a 50-yard sprint, I'm going to need my ATP production to be produced as fast as possible, right? I'm sprinting 50 yards, and I'm trying to get there as fast as I could. Well, the energy system that's going to be utilized for that is your ATP-PC system. Now, the benefit of that is it could produce ATP very quickly. The downside of it is it cannot produce ATP very long using that system. It's going to run out quickly. That system will only last about 10 seconds or so. Okay? Now, if you were going to keep running after about 10 seconds, right, what's going to happen? You're going to slow down because your body's not going to be able to keep up with the production of ATP at that rate. So the glycolytic system will then kick in. Okay, again, this is another anaerobic system. So this system primarily is going to be using glucose and glycogen, right? So your blood sugar and your stored blood sugar, it gets stored in the muscle and in the liver tissue as glycogen. That energy system is now going to kick in. And now after maybe a minute, give or take, if you're still running full speed, that system is also going to run out of, it's not going to be able to produce ATP anymore. It's going to slow down so much, you're going to have to really slow down. And then what is the energy system that takes place there? That's your aerobic system. Now, your aerobic system is also used, if I'm having this conversation with you right now, my aerobic system is what is producing the energy, so to speak, to have this conversation or to walk around or to take a shower. Your aerobic system is the primary system being used, okay? Your aerobic system is also responsible for your recovery. So even if you play a sport like football that is predominantly the ATP-PC system, right? A short burst of an intense activity followed by a rest or recovery period. That recovery period, the rate at which you recover, has a lot to do with your aerobic system. So the aerobic system is so important even if you play primarily an anaerobic sport. So as you can see, this could go very, very, very deep, right? But we're just going to talk about that there, and we're going to put that aside and understand that regardless of your sport, it's important to address your aerobic capacity. It's also important to train those specific systems that are used for your sport. So if you play football, it is still important to train your ATP-PC system. It's also important to train your aerobic system so you could recharge that system in between plays. Okay, put that aside for a second. What's important to you if you're not an athlete? Well, one, we know that there are tons of benefits and studies linked to aerobic capacity and health and longevity. So making sure you are addressing aerobic activity, that low zone heart rate work at a sustained rate for a specific period of time every day. What's one of the best ways to do that? Go for a walk 7 days per week. You do that for 30 to 60 minutes per day, or if you just shoot for 10,000 steps per day, we're addressing aerobic work. We could take that a step further. We could do aerobic work at a little bit of a higher intensity. So if you do something where maybe you're hiking up hills, maybe you're doing some type of biking or cycling, swimming, depending on the rate at which you go, but using any exercise you'd like that works for you to address your aerobic system is so important for your health, for your longevity. Now, the anaerobic system is really important because that's one of those things we talked about earlier when it comes to power. It's one of those things that you lose as you age, right? So incorporating things like hill sprints, strength training is anaerobic work, right? That's the system that's being utilized. If you're doing like a 3-rep max or a 1-rep max even, like as long as that set's not going past that like 10 to 12 second mark, the system that's being utilized there is that ATP PC system. So that's being trained in strength training, but I believe that incorporating sprints are really important for staying explosive, for staying youthful, and body composition for sure. It's really important. Now, the glycolytic stuff, that gets a little bit more sport specific. I'm not saying it's not important for the average person to train, but I would say that addressing your aerobic system, your ATP PC system, and your strength training, 3 days per week, then that's going to be some of the best things that you can do for your health, longevity, burning more calories throughout the day. So as a byproduct, possibly losing fat as long as your body fat is in check there. As long as your diet is in check there. But those are the boxes where if you're looking at, okay, what is important for an athlete and what does it mean to train like an athlete? Well, to train like an athlete means that I'm training for stability. I'm training for mobility. I'm training for power, strength. And by the way, too, we talked about relative strength. We talked about absolute strength, like unilateral strength. So single leg stuff, stability stuff, anti-rotation work, loaded carries, like that all gets put into that strength category. So if we're looking at the fundamental human movement patterns, the squat, the hinge, the lunge, the push, the pull, the carry, you throw in some isolation work in there for the hypertrophy stuff like direct arm work, calves, things like that, shrugs. You throw some of that stuff in for the hypertrophy benefits, but getting stronger in those patterns are going to be really that's the foundation of training like an athlete and enhancing your mobility and stability. Obviously, look at the balance points that are being trained if you're doing just like a basic Bulgarian split squat or something like that, right? If you're a newbie, you might just do a split squat, you'll be shaking all over the place. So there's so much there that's going to carry over and translate to your field of play, whatever your sport is, or just the game of life and being able to perform and move and operate at a high level. And then, of course, conditioning. On an athlete standpoint, it's important to make sure that you are prepared and conditioned for your specific sport. As a regular human being, it's important for life to play with your kids, to play with your dog, to just be active and healthy in general. But that health and that longevity piece, along with body composition stuff, the conditioning stuff is really important. So you have your 3 strength training days. You walk 7 days per week, 10,000 steps per day or somewhere around that. And then you have your specific, maybe you have 1 day of a little bit more higher intensity aerobic day. And then you have your high intensity anaerobic day that you have in there. And then that's a pretty solid training week for you. So guys, hopefully that makes sense. I know I kind of threw a lot of information out at you today, but I want to kick this year off strong. You combine everything that you're doing in your training program with your diet, with your recovery, with all the mindset stuff that we cover on this show. If you do that, you start to tie these things together, you're going to have the best fucking year of your life. I guarantee it. So let's just put these things into action, because without action, there is no progress. So lay out your plan, put it on paper, and then go fucking execute, because that is the only thing that will ever get you results. I love and appreciate you. Thank you for listening to today's show, and if there's one thing that you can do for me, if you enjoyed this episode or any other episode in the past, is to leave a quick review on iTunes, either a 5-star review or a written review. If you leave a written review, I will hook you up with some TTS merch. I will ship it directly to you. You just got to leave that review, and I will read it on the air on one of the next upcoming episodes, and I'll make sure that we get you your goods. So please leave a review. If you've already done that, share this episode with a friend or somebody who could help. And that's all I got for you today, guys. Thank you again for tuning in, and I will catch you next week on another episode of the Iron Life Podcast. Peace!